This is the unknown backstory of how one woman became famous for what she tried to quit. Along the way, she would go on to inspire millions of people. She would teach them about science, space, technology, and time. And she would do it in a way that was completely unique. Today's story is called The Woman Who Quit.
Season 1 of The Story features 12 women trailblazers who changed the world. The story is brought to you exclusively by Salesforce, who strives to create workplaces where everyone feels empowered to bring their full, authentic selves to work. And now, onto the story.
The young girl knew her father was dying. She was only 17, and there were so many things she wanted to tell him. There were so many questions that she and all of her family members had. They wished that he would answer. Her father's alcoholism was something that her family didn't want to face. The only people in her family who could acknowledge it was the young girl and her mother. At this point, the young girl had forgiven her father for it. After all, she had no idea what he'd gone through in World War I. He never talked about it, and her imagination was powerful enough to know why he didn't. Instead of bringing up the root cause of her father's problems, the young girl led her family on a diversion. She knew that the rest of her family just wasn't strong enough to face the truth. Their once great father was now in so much pain that he was numbing and killing himself with alcohol. Back in those days, post-traumatic stress and a damaged or swollen amygdala wasn't something that was understood by the medical community. There was no help for suffering veterans. Instead, the nation chose to label veterans with that kind of trouble as those that just had shell shock. Those with shell shock liked to drink, and that was that. But this young girl wasn't content to just slap society's label on her father. She believed in redemption. In such a dark world, you might think that this is a blessing or a horrible curse. On top of it, this young girl had developed the skill of storytelling. For her, it was easy to create an elaborate story about her father and then sell her entire family on it. Her family didn't want the truth, so instead, she told them a story that they could handle. Their father had inhaled too much mustard gas in the war. The family rallied around her story. They tried to help their father get healthy by moving to the countryside, but he only got worse. The isolation became another excuse of his to drink even more. All of this flashed through the young girl's mind. Today was a big day for her. She was returning home from boarding school. As she arrived home and walked up to the house, she noticed that the porch was already crowded with family members. A few of them were crying. As she walked up, she already knew. Her father was dead. She arrived too late. He was gone, and with him went all hope that she had of revitalizing her family and redeeming his potential. What should have been a happy reunion at her family's gorgeous country home was plagued by sadness. Years passed. The young girl grew up, and along the way, she fell into a deep, decade-long depression. As a child, her teachers had labeled her stupid, and now that she was on her own in the real world, she was meeting dozens of new people. Most of them thought that she was stupid too. She was crushed by her father's death, trying to battle her own depression, and in defeat, she accepted their label. In her mid-20s, the fog of depression briefly lifted. The girl decided to stop trying to be something that she wasn't. She stopped caring about putting on an act to impress people who already thought she was stupid. Instead, she decided to do her own thing and to do what came naturally to her, to write. She already had plenty of real-world practice. She started journaling when she was just 8 years old. When she was a teenager, she completed her first novel. It was embarrassing, not very good, but still, she had finished her first novel. A decade later, in her mid-20s, she finished another novel. This one caught the attention of a major publisher. They offered to buy the novel, and she said yes. To her, it was a painfully obvious fact that the memoir was just a retelling of her life from ages 10 to 19, but somehow the publisher didn't really seem to care. People liked the book, and the publisher bought the rights. The most interesting thing about her story was that she had written a romance story into it, and to her shock, it began to come true in real life. She met a man similar to the one that she created in her book, and on top of it, they fell in love and got married, just like the characters in her novel. After they got married, they had children, and for a time, they both entered into a joyous season of their life. The struggles of their past melted away. Her husband was a play and television actor, and the two of them were able to afford a small house in the countryside. But tragedy struck again. She and her husband were best friends with a couple that lived just right down the road. One day they got a phone call. Their best friends had been killed in a car crash. Their friends had a single child, and she and her husband stepped up and adopted the orphan. Money became tight for their growing family, so she and her husband again teamed up and bought a small country store. They ran it and, for a while, were living the dream. Their work was honest, their children were happy, and the couple was the epitome of the post-World War II dream of a better future. But all wasn't well in the woman's mind. Her first novel never really had taken off like she wanted. It irritated her that it was obviously a memoir of her childhood. Now the publisher thought that she was just a memoir writer, couldn't do anything else, and they turned down every single new pitch that she sent them. She wanted to write fiction, to create novels and series that span generations. She wanted to explore concepts like the nature of space and time, along with themes like redemption. She wanted to explore the potential for human knowledge through fiction. The ideas and stories that were brewing inside her head weren't modest. They were staggering ideas of a genius. Some of them even possessed the potential to shake the very foundations of science. Had any of the people who first labeled her stupid been able to fathom her ideas, they would have gone into shock. Truly stupid people are the only ones that call isolated geniuses stupid. But now the woman wasn't isolated. She had a family, a husband, a support system. All of those things were bricks in a foundation that is a massive help for any budding artist. Despite that foundation and support system, the demands of parenting were overwhelming. She had turned 40 years old and hadn't yet had the success she wanted. The general store that she and her husband owned wasn't making enough money, but they kept at it. That year was hard. Fall turned into winter, and then Christmas passed. On New Year's Eve, the woman stopped to pause and reflect on the year. She usually took that time to set goals for herself. But this New Year's Eve, she was so frustrated that instead of listing her goals, she created just one. Her goal for the coming year was to quit writing. It was too painful. Later, she would look back on that year and comment on it. All during the decades of my 30s, I went through spasms of guilt because I spent so much time writing, because I wasn't like a good New England housewife and mother. When I scrubbed the kitchen floor, the family cheered. But I couldn't make decent pie crusts. And with all the hours I spent writing, I was still not pulling my own weight financially. The above reflection from her sounds like guilt. Guilt and shame are the enemies of creation, and they must be cast off by every aspiring artist. Frustrating doesn't even begin to describe what she was going through. She had new ideas and books that she was trying to develop, but whenever she submitted one to publishers, she constantly got rejected. Meanwhile, she was trying to help raise her children, and on top of it, she was trying to raise her friend's daughter. Living in the country was lonely, and she missed her friends that were killed in the car accident. She was grateful that they stepped up and adopted their friend's daughter who had been orphaned. The young girl was a blessing, but it was also a challenging reminder of her friend's early death. On the day she decided to give up writing, she covered up her typewriter. Instead, she turned her focus to becoming a better mother and wife. Her writing stopped, but her ideas didn't. They only intensified. It was now the end of January, just about the time when most people are ready to quit their New Year's resolutions. She was no different. She decided to quit. She decided that she didn't care if she didn't have a high level of talent. She didn't care if she never had another book published. Even if she never became a successful writer, the pain of not writing was too much to bear. Like many of her goals that came before, she quit. She failed. She tried to quit writing, but couldn't stop. She knew she was at a critical moment in her life. If she kept pushing forward, it was quite possible that she would fail in a very public way. Everyone around her would see it. The thought of that put her stomach into knots. But what if she continued to write and eventually caught a lucky break? The fleeting glimpse at what success might be like was intoxicating. She threw off the cover of her typewriter and got to work. Soon the words were flowing. New ideas emerged and were taking form in the story of Meg. A girl was surrounded by people who thought she was stupid. On top of that, Meg's father had gone missing. The adults had given up trying to find him. In her story, Meg and her brother recognized that the adults weren't coming to save them or find their father. They had to begin the search on their own. That year, she decided to keep writing. She had to face and win the final battle with depression. Like a monster, it had been stalking her whole life. She killed the monster, kept pushing, and finished the year with her new novel completed. She asked people to read it, and they thought it was crazy. Not in a good way. It was a science fiction story inspired by space, time, and love. Nobody took it seriously. She shopped the novel to over 40 publishing houses. All of them said no. It wasn't that surprising. After all, the novel explored quantum physics and presented young characters fighting evil. On top of it, her book was one of the first science fiction stories to present a female protagonist as the hero. Moreover, the heroine wasn't an invincible superhero, but rather a normal girl who decided to become more than normal. This heroine used her intellect, science, faith, and reason to save her family. Instead of the normal, petty sibling fights and quarrels, this female hero teamed up with her siblings to save the world. To say these ideas were unnerving to the male-dominated world of publishing would be an understatement. The 40 no's she received weighed heavily on her, and soon she gave up trying to sell the book. Exhaustion and the demands of motherhood crept in, and she had to take a break. Her first act after taking a break was to throw her mother a party. At the party, she reveled in the delight on her mother's face. All the work she put into the party had made someone else happy. The woman who quit did her best to be present at the party, and she entertained each of her mother's guests. Late in the day, she met one guest who stood out. He had heard that she was a writer and seemed interested. He was a publisher, but unlike the other men she met, he didn't seem threatened by her or her book idea. Instead, he was fascinated. He'd never met an author like this. He'd never heard about a novel with a plot and characters that was this original. He asked to read a manuscript of the book. She agreed, gave him a copy, and the party ended. The days passed, and the woman waited to hear her 41st rejection. But it never came. Soon, a letter from the man she met at the party arrived in the mail. She opened it, read it, and couldn't believe it. The publisher said yes. Her new novel was soon on bookshelves everywhere. It began to sell like crazy. Soon it was selling all over the world. Lucky for us, the woman's goal to quit writing failed. That woman was Madeleine L'Engle, and that book was A Wrinkle in Time. It's the first book in a quintet that explores reality, space, time, and provides young people with a daunting challenge. That challenge? Evil is alive and well in the world. And you have a mission, should you choose to accept it. The mission? Protect yourself, your family, your friends, and work to fight evil in all its forms. Not only does A Wrinkle in Time propose that challenge, but it offers up messages that are pretty deep. So what are some of those messages? Well, for one, in the words of one genius, the universe is stranger than we can suppose. And this isn't a call for apathy or to tap out and give up. Instead, it's a call to action. It's a call to explore our power to build, shape, direct, and create our own reality. Madeleine L'Engle went on to write 4 books in the Wrinkle in Time series. After the series, she would write and publish even more novels. While doing it all, she kept her marriage healthy and raised a successful family. She couldn't redeem her father and certain family members, but she could create a life for herself and her family that she always knew was possible. She was a genius, a pioneer, and a role model for aspiring heroes across all space and time. That's her story. What's yours going to be?
Thank you for listening to The Story. As a thank you, we have an exclusive giveaway for listeners of The Story, a chance to win 1 of 10 free tickets to Dreamforce, courtesy of our presenting sponsor, Salesforce. Salesforce is committed to supporting trailblazers like you. If you don't know Dreamforce, you are in for a treat. Dreamforce brings together thought leaders, industry pioneers, and customers for 4 high-energy days of learning, inspiration, equality, fun, and incredible concerts. You can head to thestorypodcast.com and enter to win today. That is thestorypodcast.com. Thank you again to our presenting sponsor, Salesforce, for helping promote equal opportunity and sharing these stories of trailblazers.
If you like this episode of The Story, please help spread these stories by telling one friend. Also, you can hit the subscribe button on iTunes, Google Play, or wherever you get your podcasts. The Story is created by our team here at The Mission. The Mission is your #1 source for accelerated learning. To get more stories and podcasts like this and our world-class newsletter, subscribe at themission.co. That's themission.co. See you next time.